pre-show quid pro quo. Jennifer, you get one question. Go ahead and ask it.
What first got you interested in the occult?
What first got me interested in the occult? Well, I think I've always been interested in it. My greatest influence when I was younger would be Indiana Jones. And I like that he was an archaeologist, so he dealt with tangible things, but he was also, he had a specialty in the occult, and that was maybe the first time I heard about it. And so what was this occult thing? So, and I was very young. I think I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when I watched the Indiana Jones movie, even with all the base melting and stuff like that. I loved the fact that he was dealing with tangible, real things, but these crazy mystical experiences happened to him. And if you haven't listened to the my Q&A episode, as well as Unforeseen Interlude is what it's called, I go into my history of doing practical magic, but I'd say that my curiosity was piqued very early, and it would have to be Indiana Jones. I loved the fact that he was interested in the occult, and he said that it wasn't real. It's like, this is just stories in the Bible. You don't really think this is real, do you, Marcus? And then, of course, it all comes real, and people's faces melt off, and people drink from the Holy Grail, and they turn into a skeleton and then into dust. So I loved the occult from a very early age. So that was it.
So that was like your costume for the first 10 Halloweens of your life?
Yeah, I definitely was Indiana
18.
Jones for a lot of times. I had a bullwhip.
Okay.
I literally had a bullwhip. I had an Indiana Jones fedora that I bought. I had an old brown jacket, and yeah, I for a long period of my life I dressed like Indiana Jones. I loved him.
You talk like it's past tense, but I know you still.
I still do this.
Yeah.
I'm still. Yeah, I don't know what happened to my bullwhip, but I got very good at it. I could do that thing where you whip it, and you can kind of.
You get the crack and.
Well, no, I could do the crack very easily, but that's one of the first things you know. It's quite easy, but the swinging.
Oh.
I was able to do that. That took practice, but I got it down to a science.
Well, that's good. That's good. I mean, it would have been hilarious to see how many times you fell on your ass before.
A lot. I really did. But no, by the end, I was great. I was up there with the Indiana Jones. It was a nylon bullwhip. I wish it was because his real bullwhip was made out of kangaroo leather. Oh. So Indiana Jones. That's where I get my curiosity for the occult. Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This? A podcast that stiffens the sinews and summons the blood. In this podcast, we will be talking about magic, the occult, the paranormal, the supernatural, the esoteric, and the weird. And today, I am joined by my guest, Jennifer.
Hello there.
Jennifer, how are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm very good. Very good. So, if you haven't tuned into the podcast before, this is how it works. I give a list of about 25 topics to my guests, and they get to choose one of these topics, and then they come in and we record an episode. They're good to ask any question that they want. And so this is a way, I think, for people that are curious in magic or the occult or all the things that I previously listed to talk about these things, and they can ask any question. That's how the show works. And your topic is a very interesting one today. You've chosen New Thought, which is interesting. Because, as I mentioned, I give about 25 topics, and as we go through it, it gets whittled down, so I have to add new topics. I think I added New Thought to the list about 5 episodes ago, and every podcast that I recorded since adding it, all of my guests, it was like the topic that they chose and then New Thought. So it was New Thought has been always there. And then I say, like, well, which one do you really want to do? And then they would pick the inevitable one, secret societies or meditation or William Blake. But the second, very close second, would always be New Thought. So thank you for finally picking this one, because I think this is a good one to get out of the way for very, what will become obvious reasons. Let's dive into New Thought. A ton of occult now, things like the Kabbalion, and a lot of what is called New Age, which would be things like The Secret, is basically New Thought. And what is New Thought? I'm going to give you the best summary of New Thought that I can in 3 words. New Thought is thinking that thoughts are causative, that the things you think can change your reality or change your future. The tenets of New Thought are several. They have ones that you can kind of, through the groups, kind of whittle down and say that this is their core values, those that were involved in the New Thought movement back in the late 19th century and kind of up until this day. That there is an infinite intelligence, i.e. God, and that it is everywhere. Spirit is the totality of real things. True human selfhood is divine. Divine thought is a force for good. Sickness originates in the mind. Right thinking has a healing effect, and that there is a higher consciousness. A lot of things, especially in this day and age, the terms law of attraction, or the term law of attraction, gets brought up. And that's the idea that if you have a negative outlook, you will attract negative things. If you have a positive outlook, good things will happen to your life. It was hugely popular, I think it was maybe 10, 12 years ago, with the release of Rhonda Byrne's The Secret. Oprah talked about it a lot. I think Jim Carrey said that he's always been practicing the law of attraction. And so this is based in New Thought. This is not a new idea. It seemed new at the time, but it was really an old idea that had been brought into the present. New Thought is also kind of where, it's not the only place, but it's kind of where the idea of energy comes from, or a life force. When people talk about the crystals having a certain life force, or this kind of thing, I don't like the term energy too much. I try to use different terms than energy, but every once in a while when I try to visualize something or try to tell something about, moving to certain parts of your body, I will use the word energy, but I don't overuse the term. And it is extremely overused in this day and age. So how do you change things in life through thoughts? There's several techniques that those are involved in New Thought go to, and here we go. One is affirmations. There is affirmative prayer. There is creative visualization. There is personal magnetism, and positive thinking. And I think more than anything, positive thinking is the one that's the biggest of those strategies that they say will help thoughts change a reality. So I'm going to tell a small little anecdote here. It's a personal anecdote. I believe that I was maybe 11 or 12. My mother had been to a seminar, and she just said she was going somewhere. But when she got back home, it would have been, 9 o'clock or something like that. She couldn't wait to tell us about the seminar. So she gathered us all up. She said, everybody come into the living room. Here we go. And what she did, it was very odd. She started talking originally about auras. I'm going to preface this, actually, before I get into the story. My mother she's not spiritually inclined over the top. I know a lot of people's parents, a lot of them are into New Age stuff. My mom never really was. I think as far as she got was homeopathy. She was, for a period of time, she was very big into homeopathy. I think that's kind of fallen away. To this day, I think my mother is the only member of my family that doesn't know I'm doing this podcast. I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm a little bit scared to tell her, but that's neither here nor there. But yes, she gathered us all into the living room. She started talking about auras. And then she had us do this strange thing. She would tell my brother to stand beside me, stand in front of me, and she told me to lift my arm at a 90-degree angle. And I did so. And then my mother said, okay, Doug, I want you to think your worst thoughts about Brian, which would be my brother. And I did. And she said, really go to a bad place where Brian, just wish the worst thing on him. And Brian's going to push down on your arm. So I held my arm up, and I was thinking terrible things about my brother. Just terrible. And my brother found that he could just lower my arm to my side very easily. And then she said, okay, Douglas, now what I want you to do is I want you to think extremely loving, positive thoughts about your brother. Really positive thoughts. And I want you, Brian, my brother, to use the same force that you used for negative when Doug was thinking negative thoughts about you, to use the same amount of force. And he did. And I found that I was able to keep my arm level, and he couldn't push it down. And then she had one of those things where she said, okay, now I want you to think positive thoughts about your brother, but your brother's going to think negative thoughts about you. And then he was able to push my arm down, like almost immediately. And then she said, okay, now I want you both to think. Anyways, it went on like this. And then we did it with my father, with both my brother and him pushing on the arms. Anyways, this was this whole big thing about she was really into the idea of positive thinking. And the seminar that she went to was all about how your positive thoughts can change not just your mindset, but also has physical, tangible, real results in the world. Although she probably didn't know it at the time, she had most definitely attended a New Thought seminar. Yeah, so that's my little story about New Thought. So I'm going to get into a little bit of the history of New Thought. I tend to think of New Thought as America's great contribution to the occult, for better or for worse. It really picked up steam in the late 19th century. I want people to start thinking about the late 19th century in America. There was a lot of strange occult things happening. You had spiritualism that originated in America. You had Theosophy, or the Theosophical Society from Madame Blavatsky. There was the Burnt Out District, which for more than 150 years, a lot of strange things came up through there. But it was also a period of time of great change. You had electricity starting to come into the world. You had new ideas of the brain through psychology. These were starting to bubble up to the surface. You had a lot of political thought coming through, and it was definitely a somewhat tumultuous time. But above all of these things, there was a rational way of trying to see things through science, and specifically through the mind itself. We kind of relegated the mind. It was kind of like an afterthought, but this, by the late 19th century, in America specifically, people were starting to pay more attention to the mind. What is this mind? How does it work? So this was in the air, and people started to think of, like, could there be a science of religion and thought? So you had groups of people kind of independently of each other. They got behind the idea that there could indeed be what John Anderson called a practical use of occult powers of the soul. Mind/thought was very big, and its role in the world. But we have to kind of go before the late 19th century. We're going to go to the 1830s. There was a clockmaker by the name of Phineas P. Quimby. He was an interesting cat. Most people say that he was a very genuine person. He meant well. He was not fairly educated. This was also specifically in New England, in the United States. But what was drifting around at the time, again, because it was close to the burned out district, was some other occult things. You had Swedenborgianism, which Emanuel Swedenborg, who I've mentioned before, I can't wait to cover him because I really think he's an interesting character. But you also had Mesmer, and the idea of mesmerism, and that we each have this life force within us called animal magnetism that can do crazy things. It can put people into trances, and you can heal things within the body. And Quimby, he bought this. He said that this was actually so. So he tried using some of the principles of mesmerism, and he found that he could cure people. He could diagnose certain illnesses with people, and he could cure them. Eventually, he started to tour around New England with a boy whose name eludes me right now. He would put this boy in a trance, and the boy would diagnose and hopefully heal the people that would come to see him talk. He was convinced, while this was happening, that this wasn't mesmerism, but that it was the belief that these people could be cured by the boy in the trance that was the real force behind it. He said it was their belief and their willingness to believe that God had a part into it. He said that man's happiness is in his belief. So he started getting more and more followers. And around this time, you had people starting to really latch on to this idea. There was a gentleman by the name of Warren Evans. He wrote a book called The Mental Cure. And he would, at several points, kind of call this healing that he did a sort of Christian science. And if you haven't heard that term before, we're going to go into it a little bit. One of the patients of Quimby was a woman by the name of Mary Baker Eddy. I don't think she had that name when she was seeing him. I think it would have been Mary Patterson or something like that, but she married and eventually became Mary Baker Eddy. Again, she was one of his patients, but she said that there was something different that she disagreed with Quimby. Quimby said it was the power of the mind and God, and Eddy basically said that the mind's got very little to do with it. The mind is full of deceptions and illusion, and it's a force that is constantly prone to sin. It is only God, which is the divine mind. And yeah, that's it. And she is the founder of what became known as Christian Science. I'm not going to talk about her too much. She was apparently an utter tyrant of a person. Anybody that disagreed with her methods or how she saw the world was immediately ostracized. She ruled over Christian Science for a long period of time with a seemingly iron fist. So much so that one of the people that would edit the journal that she had, which was called the Christian Science Journal, her name was Emma Curtis Hopkins. She had an article in the journal in which she talked about Eastern influences within Christian Science, and immediately Mary Baker Eddy just like cut her off. I think they locked her out of her apartment or something like that, and she was completely ostracized. And yeah, you're out. If you said anything that went against Mary Baker Eddy or her beliefs, then you were gone. You were done. But which is interesting because Emma Curtis Hopkins, she was later called the teacher of teachers. She added some kind of occult principles to what didn't have a name at the time, added some supernatural forces, and she added some energies. And then this movement started growing up around her, and a lot of people really liked what she was selling, and this idea of the mind being able to help people and change your reality. And eventually it became known as the New Thought movement. We don't exactly know when the term New Thought got applied to this movement. Some people say it was from a poem written by Ralph Waldo Emerson called Summer in 1870. But what we do know, I think, is in 1899, there was a conference with a lot of people involved in this movement, and they said New Thought in it. But speaking as we all are now, all of these movements were New Thought. And it did become a national movement. Religion, healing, this was it. And it was very open. The ideas were adopted by many people, and especially people that were religious. They could have their religion, they could have their church going, but they also had this other thing where they could go to these people that purported to have New Thought as a real movement, and they weren't considered as being evil. So it caught on like wildfire. It really was. William James, at one point, the great phenomenologist and one of my heroes, he was very fascinated by New Thought and their ideas. One thing about New Thought is that it was hugely popular among women, extremely popular amongst those of the fairer sex, as we shall say, which is something that still sticks to this day with the popularity of The Secret and Oprah. A vast majority of the people purchasing or buying into this idea right up till now are women.
Would you think that a lot of that came from, because in those times when it first became popular, there wasn't much control in women's lives? That was a way that they could make their life better without...
Absolutely. And I think that the idea itself is very popular now for nearly the same reasons. It's something that gives them a lot of agency. It's taking control of your life, which is incredibly popular, especially for a gender which we have done terrible. We, as in men, have done terrible things too. Mm-hmm. But it was very huge, and you're absolutely correct. They had little to no power back in the day, and this was giving them a bit of this back. It was also very adaptable to several viewpoints that people had, depending on what your background was. Here's the kind of the thing about Hopkins is that she moved to Chicago and her ideas became very big. And Chicago was a happening place at the end of the 19th century. Another one of these people was William Walker Atkinson from Chicago as well. He was the guy that, I'm just going to say this, he wrote the book The Kabbalion. It's one of those things that it's always purported to be an occult text, but really, it says that it's Hermeticism, is written by the three initiates and all this kind of weird stuff. I'm basically going to come out and say it's William Walker Atkinson. And if there's a Scooby-Doo monster, you finally get the Kabbalion and get him. And it's the Scooby-Doo monster of Hermes Trismegistus. You take off the mask and it's just William Walker Atkinson and New Thought. But that's one for another day. I'm going to be adding the Kabbalion to my list of 25 topics very soon because it's becoming very popular yet again. Anyways, William Walker Atkinson in 1906, he wrote Thought Vibrations or the Law of Attraction in the Thought World. And this is where the Law of Attraction entered into the national consciousness. We'll speak a little bit about that later. But what needs to be said was that it was definitely a movement, and it definitely was a force to contend with. But things started to go a little bit differently. I'm going to read now from a book written by an author that I will talk about a little bit later on in the episode. And he said, ironically, or perhaps inevitably, New Thought is a term that few Americans would hear after World War II. Its ideas were so widely adopted, a sociological study of the 1950s found that most inspirational literature published in America between 1875 and 1955 had some kind of New Thought bent. that the source itself became obscured. So it kind of entered into the consciousness. And a lot of things written now, specifically to do with the occult, they have a new thought bent to it, but the words new thought will not be mentioned once. That's how pervasive this idea became in North America, specifically in the US. But what we need to realize is that very shortly after New Thought came into effect, it became very material based and about things happening in your life and about success. You have Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, and you had Napoleon Hill, even as recently as Rhonda Byrne, who wrote The Secret. Because America is a place of go-getters and the American dream, it became extremely success-based. If you're able to shift your mind and your thoughts and shape your reality for your personal success, then that makes you an American and that makes you an adherent of New Thought. So it's from what started out as just being able to heal people, it quickly became about how to make you a rich person, basically.
Well, and how to measure whether or not New Thought works. And because there is, self-fulfilling prophecies, and there is something to be said about believing positively to achieve your goals, many people then followed the New Thought movement.
Absolutely. Very much so. The main idea behind New Thought, as I said, is that thinking creates reality. And this much, I think people, even those that are very materialist and very skeptical about occult powers, even they will say like, oh yeah, that's true. Like, your thoughts can, in some way, we don't understand it yet, but your thoughts can, in some way, influence reality. And eventually it'll be something in the brain and quantum physics. But again, it's so pervasive here that most people you will meet will say, like, yeah, it's a given. It's an absolute given. The idea, though, is that if it can be voluntary, that it can change your reality. This is one of those things that you can seek out to do and therefore manage things in a very real, material way because you think it. These bring up some very interesting points. And I'm going to call these 3 points the ugly, the bad, and the good. So for the ugly, let's get into it. We're going to dip back into the past for a little bit, and then we're going to bring it into the present. So in 1952, a Methodist Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, he published a book. It was called The Power of Positive Thinking. It was a huge success. It spent 98 weeks as a bestseller. It is still one of the most popular self-help books that you can buy. It always kind of creeps into the charts. It is almost a timeless book since it was published. To this day, the idea of positive thinking is so pervasive in society. It's where we get all of those shitty, sanctimonious motivation posters that you go into any office. It's just, think positive, or somebody's talking on the phone. It's just like, positive thoughts, both thinking about you. We can basically hone it down to Norman Vincent Peale. He said that spirituality and material success are not mutually exclusive and that you can have both. This idea, well, I like it. I really do. In lesser minds, things can get twisted. So we're going to play a little game here. It's a guessing game. You ready? Okay.
Oh, I'm ready.
All right, Jen, who am I talking about? Never thinks poorly of himself. Everything is about them. Anything negative about this person is wrong. His convictions are the only thing that matter and the key to his success in the world. Who am I talking about?
Trump.
There you go. Yes. Donald Trump. So, Donald Trump's parents actually attended the Marble Collegiate Church on Fifth Avenue in New York, which was the church where Norman Vincent Peale was at. Donald Trump was a familiar face at this church for over 50 years. He, in fact, married his very first wife, Ivanka, at this church. Trump has said that there are two mentors in his life, his father and Norman Vincent Peale. And if you've ever heard Trump talk about his father, to put Peale on almost the same pedestal as him is actually insane. This guy had an enormous influence on Donald Trump. Trump was actually once quoted as saying, "The mind can overcome any obstacles. I never think of the negative." And this is some serious fucking mojo. I think this is a kind of mindset that positive thinking can create people like this. There's always these talks on occult forums or shit like this where they say, is Trump a magician or is he a sorcerer and all this kind of stuff. I think it's a very lame discussion, but I think the idea that you are always right, everybody else is wrong, especially if they speak negatively about you. If they speak positively about you, it's just, yes, it's self-evident. This is almost a form of madness. And a lot of psychologists are from a distance and very a priori diagnosing Donald Trump as being, if not self-deluded, he's kind of insane.
Well, and if you look at the world's tyrants, that's something that they've all had in common is
Absolutely.
they completely believe what they're saying. Anyone who disagrees is wrong.
Yes.
And then they self-fulfill and come in power for at least a short amount of time.
Exactly. The positivity movement, as well, holding hands with the New Thought movement, became very warped very quickly. And it became, and this is, I think, the ugliest thing, it became the philosophy of the winners. That if you are not successful and crushing life all the time, then you are not a winner. Mm-hmm. And this is the ugliest aspect of New Thought. And this is extremely troubling. And I think it's a sickness. And Trump is just a case of this. We have some terrible, terrible role models around. Some of the people that we put on the highest pedestals have this delusion that it doesn't matter who I fuck over or try to make good, as long as it's the cult of personality, as long as I'm able to make myself successful. And this really speaks to a sickness of, I don't know, lacking introspection or self-reflection, very shady morals, seemingly having zero ethics. This is, unfortunately, a lot of the times a byproduct of positive thinking and New Thought.
And in turn, it's a lot of what allows, people who have issues with psychopathy or narcissism to become so powerful and so in charge.
Yeah.
That combined with ideals of New Thought.
Yeah. Yep, it's a whole package, and it's one that it kind of fed into the American dream, New Thought. It really did. But if you go back to the beginning, it started out as trying to heal yourself from sickness. Mm-hmm. But it is now the philosophy of the winning class. If you're not a winner, then you're not a good American. And it's really unfortunately. And what's more unfortunate is that it promotes narcissism in a way. Everybody else is kind of like a vector to who you are as a person and a way for you to accomplish all of your goals in life. And to speak specifically about positivity, I like positivity. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing. It's a positive thing. It really is. But it has been so overused by so many of the wrong people, and just it's a shiny nickel that Norman Vincent Peale crafted is now just like, it's grungy and tired. It's all worn out. It's just everywhere, and I kind of hate it. I just hate the sanctimonious, like, hey, you need to think better. You need to turn that frown upside down, Jen, come on, things are not going right. You just got to make it better. Just think some positive thoughts. It'll be all okay. Fuck you. Like, enough. So positivity, it's overused. It lacks complexity or nuance. It's trite. It's glib, and it is now undercut and ironized just like everything else, unfortunately. That's just what we do. And here's the other thing that's kind of ugly. New Thought is the dominant idea of an occultism now, specifically in New Age. So if you have things for apotropeia or sympathetic magic like crystals and la-di-blah, or like a little trinket like a mojo bag, it really is for you to try and make your life better by some kind of material means to make something. A lot of it is money-based and to get one over on somebody else, or to just make your things better. And yeah, with positivity, something seemingly beautiful is now very haggard and lame. So now let's talk about the bad side of New Thought. The bad, oh boy. And the bad is very bad. For some reason, New Thought has an extremely dark aspect to it. And that is the inability to address suffering, despair, and tragedy. The law of attraction, which is a huge tenet of New Thought, basically says that you attract these things into your life, and now you should feel bad about it. This is all your fault. And this is a toxic metaphysics to apply to somebody's life. To this day, there is little that the New Thought figures do or say to address this properly. It's either an afterthought or it is dismissed in a very unsatisfactory way. I'm still trying to meddle with it myself. The idea that people that are ill or people that have constant bad things and are pushed down are merely just not thinking enough positive thoughts. They're not sending out the good vibes. They're all about bad energy, and that's the reason that their life is shit. And this is something that I don't think it'll ever be answered by anybody from New Thought in a proper way. This is the elephant in the room for New Thought, and I think that that's something that people need to realize about this and really confront it within themselves if they do have a New Thought bent. There's another thing. Specifically, when science tries to talk about New Thought or mind-thought causation, is the idea of wishful thinking. And what these people are doing is wishful thinking, and specifically towards something like sickness. Now, I don't want to go into too much about placebos and whatnot, because that is still something that we kind of understand how they work, but we don't know the true science behind it. I believe there's a book called 13 Things That We Still Don't Know that goes into placebos very well. There's also neuroplasticity. And just as a bit of an anecdote, one of my very close friends, he helped edit probably the book on neuroplasticity. I'm not going to mention that book's name, nor am I going to mention my friend's name, but I remember how disheartened he was when the initial reviews for this book started coming out, and this was a couple of years ago, and a lot of the scientific community were dropping the terms like pseudoscience or occult or new age. It really made him feel terrible. But these things aside, the idea that disease and illness can be alleviated merely by thinking positive thoughts or seeing yourself as being healthy is fucking stupid. It's really, really dumb. Get some fucking help if you're ill. I mean, the cases of people that were somehow miraculous, able to just think positive thoughts and then eventually the cancer went away are few and far between. Far more people that entertain these thoughts and get rid of any kind of medical treatment, they die. Vast majority of them do. And I'm also not going to mention any names. I have friends who have family members that are sick, and they did do this. They just said, you know what, I'm going to do positive affirmations. I'm going to do prayer, and I'm going to visualize myself being healthy. And truth be told, they died very quickly. Yeah. They did not live to past a period of several months.
Well, and often when that treatment starts to fail, they come back and try and go through medical procedures, and it's too late.
Yep. You know, I know we're talking about the bad. That being said, having a positive outlook when you're sick is a good thing. It really is, and it does help. And prayers and affirmations, they're not all bad, but using that as the only system of treatment is fucking stupid. And anybody that says that I can cure myself through positive thoughts is deluded. This is a huge part of Christian Science, and I'm going to link to a video in my show notes. It's a story from Spalding Gray. If you don't know who Spalding Gray is, he did monologues. He was an actor, but he grew up in New England, and because that's where a lot of Christian Science came from, he was raised as a Christian Scientist, and he tells a story, you know, and this is true. If you have an illness and you call one of the hotlines or you go to one of the reading rooms for Christian Science, they will ask you certain questions, but you are not allowed to talk about your illness. You can't give it a name. If you give it a name that gives the illness power, you have to call it an error. And it is an error that needs to be corrected. They will also ask you if you've sought doctor's help. And if you say yes and you are going through treatment, they will hang up on you or they will kick you out. You have to totally get rid of doctors to be able to get help from Christian Science. And this is insanity.
So can I just ask you, have they ever actually given a reason in New Thought or in the Christian scientific community as to why you couldn't treat it both medically and through this spiritual treatment?
No, truth be told, Christian Science is not my wheelhouse. I might be going off of information that might be a bit old. Maybe they have relaxed, but that might have changed.
But with no explanation to why you can't see a doctor, why you can't travel. don't like both routes.
No, I think it's the acknowledgement of the fact that you have something wrong with yourself. That is enough.
And that would go, that's enough for your body to manifest this issue further.
Yes. And again, it goes to your mind. This illness is because your mind is in some way ill. There's also another thing that I kind of find wrong with New Thought, and it is the idea that everything is in the mind. It's all mind. And this kind of creates a kind of sloppy monism, that all is one and all is mind, and that the physical flesh in your body is some way in error. A lot of this came through the 1960s with a lot of Asian and Eastern influences, just, again, this kind of mingled with New Age. And so I hate this idea. I really dislike this monist, we are an error of consciousness, and we're just kind of stuck here for this period of time. That doesn't sit very well with me. I like to think, and I've talked about this many times before in this podcast, I have a very animist outlook. I see things not as everything is a one, or that there are levels of attainment or aethers or thing like that. I think that this is mainly, there's one continuum of existence. The best way that I try to think of things, they exist in ecosystems. The mind is one force in this ecosystem. You have the objective, the subjective, the imagination, spirits, even mind and consciousness are animals within this ecosystem. And this is a ecosystemic life, basically. I think that's a bit more healthy. I don't like this. It's all one mind kind of thing. And with that, we're going to talk about the good. So what do I think is good about New Thought? And I think the plus side is actually quite interesting. I think that thinking about want and desire is very important. And New Thought allows you to confront these ideas that what do you truly want? Right? The number one thing that they start with would be money, right? But I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to be wealthy or wanting to be rich, but that you have to have some very good ethics, and don't be anything that negatively affects other people. More than anything, to take New Thought kind of allows us to take a little bit of a distance and truly confront within yourself, what is an idyllic outcome for my life? What would that be? And it also allows us to ask these hard questions within your life. Again, we live in a very materialist, success-based life. I think if you get down to bones as to New Thought, says to you that you have to, on your own personally, ask yourself these hard questions and look outside of the values of society and look within yourself. And ask maybe, just to use the example, is money everything? Is that really it? A lot of people would say, well, it would allow me to achieve other things. I'd be able, if I had more money, I could travel. And what I really want to do is travel. You see, the money is the first thing that we go to. But what you really want to do is to travel, right? So you have to confront these interesting questions. Also, speaking about money, have you met any wealthy people? They're just as fucking miserable as everybody else. They have different anxieties. They have different things riding on them. They're as messed up as you are, right? They really are. So, if true, New Thought and its magical implications are vast, and how you go about using it is Liberty Hall. Another thing that I think is really good about New Thought is that it allows you to take a look at how you see the universe, what your place in it is, and how does mind and imagination enter into it. People who have listened to this podcast, and I talk about this book several times, but I've had my mind blasted by a book called Time Loops, written by Dr. Eric Wargo. And he talks a lot about the Minkowski block universe, and that everything exists in a four-dimensional block, and time, past, present, and future are all there. It's not that they're unchanging, but they're in some strange way. There's things you can tinker with it. New Thought kind of allows us to think about what are your metaphysics of the universe, and how do things like past, present, and future, this is the life eternal, and this is it. New Thought, it concentrates on the present and the future, but the longer that I've sat with the idea of New Thought, the more I am trying to reconfigure or examine the past, I think. Maybe this is something that more people that are interested in New Thought should do. Take a look, not so much at what's happening now or the future, but look at times in your past where you were successful, when you were happy? What was your behavior like? What were the things that you were doing to get you to that place? Was it all out of your hands? I don't think it is. So this is kind of how the past can help influence the present and the future, which I don't think that a lot of New Thought does, but maybe now it will be a bit more important. Was I truly successful and happy back in the past? And also, what were their signs? Like, have I ignored some signs in my present situation, or kind of signposts to allow me to be this better person? If I ask these hard questions, that I can truly be. There are things that you can see from not just your past, but in your present state that might be able to help you to make your life the thing that you desire it to truly to be.
Well, and I think going back to a comment you made about, looking at your past successes, trying to remind yourself, like, if you were really happy, and I think that's a big part about trying to find true happiness and trying to use those past experiences for your future, is when you're relying on your memory, there's a very good chance that you are going to make up a portion of that. Like, your memory is not valuable, or is invaluable, it will make up its own little moments and create its own storyline. So how would you say trying to truly remember something, and like how would you go about that?
Well, again, with this kind of stuff, I think imagination has a lot to do with New Thought as well, is that even if it's a bit of a fallacy, it's still useful. Because it's not real or might be false in some way, still doesn't mean that it's not useful.
That's true.
Yeah. Right? So the other thing I have to say is that these metaphysics of the universe, you have to get them right, but be ready to retool it from time to time. Again, I have a great amount of comfort that I get from seeing a kind of animism behind the universe and seeing everything as part of an ecosystem, and there's ecosystems within the ecosystems, and that it's just not one thing. So there's also some things within the literature, specifically the earlier New Thought literature, clues as to how to kind of have glimpses of your future in some strange way. I think dreams play a part of that. We're just starting to understand the crazy aspects of dreams, and although there is no locked down function of them, maybe there's some clues there. I keep talking about this, and other people that are involved in New Thought have brought this up, especially recently, as hypnagogia. Or hypnagogia, whatever you want to call it, that kind of state, that liminal state that you have right before you fall asleep. That's some of the times where I have some crazy, maybe premonitions, but I've had instances where it's like I've seen the future. I'm going to talk about who I consider the hero of New Thought, and his name is Mitch Horowitz. Now, if you were to take a Google image search of Mitch Horowitz, you would see what looks like an older gentleman, an older punk. He's got tattoos all over his body. He wears a Dead Kennedys or a Misfits t-shirt. He ripped jeans kind of thing. But what is he all about? Positive thinking. He's about New Thought and positive thinking. That's his jam. And I love him. He's a very kind man. If you have a question for him, he will definitely go out of his way to answer you. He's very eloquent. He has his ducks in a row. He's a bit of an iconoclast. I like this. This might be the whole punk ethos that he has, because New Thought has kind of fallen into ill repute, I'd say, and it's not popular. It wasn't popular for a very long period of time. And other texts like the Kabbalion, which I mentioned earlier, he sticks up for these things, and he says there is definite merit in these things. He defends New Thought better than anybody ever, I think, and he's still alive, and we're blessed to have him. He's written 2 books, basically, about New Thought and positive thinking. His first book was called One Simple Idea. It's worth reading, but his other book about New Thought is called The Miracle Club, and this is a great book. And this is a book that I suggest to people that are like staunch materialists that don't even have like the slightest curiosity about, or maybe just a sliver of a curiosity about the occult and the strange metaphysics. His book, The Miracle Club, which is all about New Thought, is the book to read. As I mentioned last episode, people come to me and they ask for book recommendations if you want to get into magic or the occult. I'll mention either Gordon White's Chaos Protocols or Pieces of Eight, Aidan Wachter's 6 Ways. But I think the one that everybody should read, who is a magician or is even interested, I would put The Miracle Club up as this book. It is a fantastic book. I love Mitch. Even if I have different opinions with him in some things, I think his idea of Hermeticism is very different than mine. That's just, you're going to have these differences with people, but he nails New Thought better than anybody before him, and maybe even anybody after. And I'm indebted to Mitch Horowitz for introducing me to Neville Goddard. Now, Neville Goddard is an extremely interesting character. He was a New Thought character. He was born in Barbados, I believe, in 1905, and he passed away in I think, New York in 1972. I could be wrong. Goddard is the kind of New Thought person that I can get behind. Mitch Horowitz was the editor of Tarcher Penguin, and I believe there was something called Tarcher Cornerstone Collection, in which they released a lot of interesting texts, the Corpus Hermeticum. They also released the Kabbalion, Bullfinch's Mythology, the Tao Te Ching, Colin Wilson's The Outsiders, but he also released a book by Neville Goddard called At Your Command, and I had never heard of Neville Goddard before. I got the book, and I was quite surprised at what Goddard was all about. He says that the mind can change things. All right, so there's the check mark, New Thought there, but that imagination is God. Anytime that God has been talked about in the Bible, just replace it with either mind or imagination. I think that's really cool. He thought that these things were myths, but that the imagination is the true God, which is very Blakean. If you listen to the William Blake episode, I think these guys were kind of thinking on the same lines. Mitch is doing a very good job at trying to get people to cotton on to Neville Goddard, but he has this lecture, I think it was called No One to Change But Self, in which he actually talks about hypnagogia, or that strange state that you have before you fall asleep. He said you do it at like 3 p.m. And it's actually, I've since finding this essay, I kind of do around that time. It's usually 6-7 hours after waking up kind of thing, I find. Again, it's those small little clues about how to see what your true ambitions are, how you can utilize these tricks to get to that stage of life that you really want to have. And if New Thought is interesting to you, not The Secret. I guess you can if you really want to. Not What the Bleep Do We Know. Mitch Horowitz and Neville Goddard. Those are the people to go through. So we're coming to the end here. Mitch Horowitz has got what's called the 10-day challenge. And what it is that he wants you to set 10 days for yourself to have an attainable goal. I believe Gordon White once put it very eloquently. He said, do not attack walled cities. Don't think that in 10 days you're going to land on the moon. You know, in 10 days, maybe you're not going to have some pop star who's popular now be your wife, or you're going to get a date with them. Try to set yourself a somewhat attainable goal, but don't be boring about it. Like, in 10 days, I'm going to have, I don't know, a grilled cheese sandwich. Actually try to get somewhere in the middle is what we're looking at. I'll link to it in the show notes. Actually go through Mitch Horowitz's 10-day challenge, and it's quite effective. It actually worked for me a couple of times, and you kind of see that strange, the subjective and the objective is blurring, and how is this possible? It really makes you ask your questions. So if this stuff is interesting to you, this is the place to start. Mitch Horowitz's 10-day challenge, and then try to read the stuff of that Mitch Horowitz has written, specifically The Miracle Club. I just also want to say about New Thought and mind being able to change reality. Nothing can replace hard work and commitment. I think people need to understand this, right? That is also a huge animal in this ecosystem.
You mean I don't get to think positively and go buy a lottery ticket?
Well, there you go. New Thought has been very much on my mind recently because of this podcast and what I'd like to do with it. People really are reaching out to me, and I hope that somehow I can utilize this as some aspect of my life, maybe not just putting out something that other people can really cotton on to, but maybe in some way it becomes a launch pad or a larger aspect of my life. And even before I put the topic of New Thought up, I have been doing a lot of thinking, specifically because of Mitch Horowitz's book, The Miracle Club. It made me ask the question, what do I value? What do I want, and what is my desire? And if my podcast is successful, that's one thing. But what was the actual reason that I'm doing this podcast? And I did that soul searching, if you want to use such a term. And I got down to the fact that I think something in me wants to teach and to share. That's the bigger thing. And it's not the money, and it's not the lifestyle, and it's not the lifestyle of a podcast. It's pretty great for what I've heard. But the bigger hole that I think I needed to fill and that I wanted in my life, more than anything, I wanted to share. So here's the other thing about New Thought. I'm going to use a small example. I will liken it to the climate change debate. What the hell does New Thought and positive thinking have to do with climate change? Even if climate change is not man-made, what's the fucking harm,
right,
in trying to make the world a living, habitable place? Where is the fucking harm? Some people might lose a bit of money. That's an oversimplification lacking any nuance, but we put the planet as a factor in the decisions that we make going forward from here on in, and then we find out later on that, oh, by the way, the Earth is just warming anyways. Where's the fucking harm? The same thing for me goes when talking about new thought or talking about positive thoughts. What's the fucking harm? Really?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you remember that that's not all that's going to save you, then absolutely, if you do that in a healthy, balanced way, what is the harm?
What is the harm? Yep. And yeah, I have to constantly remind myself that it's not all bad. My mind goes there immediately. That's kind of the first reaction that I have, is that I go to the negative and I give in to despair. And I'm getting better at that. I really am. But I have also recognized within myself that I need to think more positively.
I mean, misery makes good company is a saying for a reason.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it's very easy, I think, for everyone to go that way, especially in today's society. It's getting a little crazy out there.
It's getting a little crazy, but if you can be that, that one ship in the storm that just knows that the wind's going to change one of these days.
And that being said, I mean, it's crazy out there, but there are more conversations about climate change, women's rights, ending racism, all of these huge issues that we've been dealing with for centuries than there ever has been.
Yep.
So it's hard, but it's better than it's been.
Absolutely. And I have to constantly remind myself, my life is better than it used to be.
Yep.
It really is. So get the want and desire, everybody. Figure out your view of how all of this reality works and where thoughts, mind, consciousness, imagination, the objective, the subjective, how it all fits together, how that ecosystem works. And remember that it is just a model still, but how does the past, the present, and the future enter into it? You got to start to work these things out and make it interesting. Make it an admirable view of reality. Make the metaphysics something positive, an existence that you want to get behind. I see nothing wrong with Goddard's dictum to live in a state of the wish fulfilled, live from the end. That you are now not in a state of wanting, but of having already received. So be thankful now, and also happy in some way. And stay positive. That's it. That's the episode on New Thought. It's funny when I rehearse this stuff before my guests arrive, and it's been very cloudy where I live for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And as soon as I said that last line, be thankful now and be happy in some way and stay positive, literally the light came in through my windows. And it was like a come to God moment.
Yeah.
It really was. I was like, where's my phone? Instagram needs to see. No, that's not my reaction. But it was just like, yeah. So that's the show. Be thankful now and happy in some way and stay positive. So that's it, everybody. That's the show. Head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you will find out how to subscribe on iTunes, on Google Play, on YouTube, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, on Radio Public, on TuneIn. If they've got podcasts, I'm going to be there, guys. Also on my webpage, you're going to find links to Twitter, which I'm getting a little bit better at, to Instagram. I have no idea how that shit works, but I'm trying. I'm really trying. And to Facebook, which is kind of like an afterthought for me. I mean, people enjoy it. I'm hugely popular with young men in India on Facebook. I don't know if anybody else is, but yeah, I'm really popular with those fellas. Also, guys, on my webpage there's going to be tons of show notes. I go out of my way for those show notes. They're getting longer. Every episode I do, they seem to get much, much longer. I have a lot of people giving me feedback for that. They're like, dude, every time you release an episode, like every 10 days, I have just a list of things I need to read. And that's the point. That is really it. I'm here to share. Also, guys, I haven't mentioned this the last couple of episodes, but maybe if you can do me a favor, if you really like my podcast and you like what I'm doing here, please leave a comment either on like iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you can. Let the world know that you enjoy my show. I had a comment put recently that somebody said that this was the Occult podcast that I've been waiting for. So more of that kind of stuff. I feel like what I'm sending out, maybe give some back. That's all I'm trying to say. Reach out also, guys. I love talking with all of you. A lot of people now are starting to actually contact me either through Twitter or Instagram or through email, and I will reply to you. I to reply to every single one. For now, I will. And I hope you're prepared for a long response, because I like to write and I like to respond and I like to give you everything that you asked for. And that's the show, everybody. We're going to end this on the post-show quid pro quo. Now, sometimes sometimes I will just give a question that's not in any way related to what we're talking about. Or I will sometimes ask a question exactly what we've been talking about. And so take your time with this one. I've known you for a while, or somewhat close. You're still a bit of an enigma to me. But I would like to ask, as you sit here, what is your idea of success? What would be an idyllic, successful life for you right now, heading into 2020?
I mean, this is the most obscure thing that you could say, but happiness. And that's a hard thing to define. Yeah. But yeah, heading into 2020, to be at peace and find routine and, be able to look around my life and appreciate what I have. Yeah. That would be success for me right now.
Perfect. I wish all of those things for you. I really do.
Well, thank you.
All right. Jen, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And I hope if I was to ask you to come back on the show that you'd say yes.
Absolutely.
Amazing. That's the show, everybody. Thank you again for listening from the bottom of my heart and from the most positive part of my mind, whichever part that would be. It'll be the whole mind. I want you to stay luminous, and we'll talk at you soon. Bye-bye.